The expectation around here is that you've got to be the best coach at your position in the country. If you're not having juice or you're not having fun doing it, how can you be that way? That was from Todd Hartley, who has, I mean, I don't know who the best tight end coach in the country is. I know who the best recruiter is in the country in terms of tight ends, and that's certainly Todd Hartley. Uh, just like Darnell Washington and Brock Bowers, just I would just leave it there. Neither of them from east of the Rockies, and they come play at Georgia. Both exceptional freaks, and it continues for Todd Hartley and company. But it's not just recruiting; you got to develop guys too. You look at Oscar Delp. Georgia's been really good at their number one tight end for some time. And I think more than that point, though, I want to talk about what Todd Hartley was talking about with this particular comment. The expectation around here, talking about at Georgia, the expectation at Georgia is that you've got to be the best coach at your position in the country. And I'm not going to act like I know all sort of. I guess it's multiple. It's probably over 1,000 assistant coaches in the country. I could not possibly know who the best is at any particular position. I know this. They don't have any laggards at Georgia. There's no one that's like, oh, someone else is obviously better than whoever the guy is at Georgia. I don't know who that person would be. You know, I don't know. There could be people that are in the same universe or slightly better, but there's no one that's like, oh my gosh, why don't they have this person or this guy? It's not like that. And I want to say this real quick too about Kirby, and what he does really well that the public I don't think can. I think if you're in sales, maybe you could understand this. Kirby Smart knows a lot of football people, like a lot. And he's only been the coach at Georgia for 9 years, but he's been in football, with the exception of 1 year. He's been in the SEC since 1994. Okay, I think it was 1 year with the Dolphins, maybe, or two, whatever it was. That was 1 year with the Dolphins. So I'm probably wrong about that, but you get my point. 94. That's 29 years of advocacy and preaching about this league and talking about it and knowing it in a way that you've been at LSU, you've been at Alabama, you've been at Georgia. I mean, Todd Hartley was making burritos in college. No offense, and I don't think any's taken. And yet Kirby had an understanding. I need this guy on my staff not because of what he did to hustle to get to where he's at, but because of the hustle that he had to get to where he's at. Like, that maybe is contradictory, but what I'm trying to say is the depth of knowledge of personnel across the country is significant. You look at Fran Brown being a head coach now, Del McGee being a head coach. You had Shane Beamer, you had Mel Tucker, Dan Lanning, Sam Pittman. A lot of people knew Sam Pittman was a big deal for sure. I'm not sure if there's a better offensive line coach than Sam Pittman in the country, but he's a head coach now. You know what I mean? Like, you could make the argument Sean Elliott. Sean Elliott's a really good offensive line coach. I don't know if he's, Stacy has proven consistently his ability to develop guys. He's just in a different world, and everyone is, in terms of what is recruiting now. Is it exclusively relationships, or is it relationships and money? Someone else can answer that question. But the expectation around here is that you've got to be the best coach you can be in your position. I will say this to what Todd Hartley said a second ago there. It should be that. I have to say, it should be that. This isn't, Charlotte, University of Charlotte. It used to be UNCW, but they've gotten away from that now. This is not Georgia State. This is not Tennessee Chattanooga. It's not Coker. You're at Georgia. There's not many places that have the power of that athletic department in all sports. I mean, like, Manny Diaz just retired from tennis. Guy won, I think, 5 national championships in his time at Georgia. I can't remember. It's a bunch, whatever it was. You look at Suzanne Yockland, Manny, Jack Bowerly, Kirby, Andy Landers. These people were either at the peak of their sport or, near it for the bulk of their time at Georgia. And the only thing Georgia's not figured out is men's basketball, which is ridiculous, and another topic for another day for those of us who've lived in that world. But the expectation should never be lower than we're competing for a national championship at every single sport at Georgia. I skipped Lou Harris-Champer. How good was softball for a long time at Georgia? It's not bad now. So it should be that you're the best in the country if you're an assistant at Georgia, because there's not a lot of places that are better than that, generally speaking. I mean, I think you could say in a lot of sports, North Carolina, certainly basketball, you've got places like Texas, Florida. There's no reason to talk about Alabama. They do not have the sports lineage, certainly, that Georgia's had. I mean, when was the last time Alabama was good at baseball or tennis or track? Or I don't know, track's probably a bad example. I know they've not been good at the last two things I've talked about. And, what you have at those places, at Texas, at Georgia, at North Carolina, at Florida, at Texas A&M for sure, at Stanford, which is that's probably a bad example. These are places where you develop the next round of coaches, the next round of greatness, and they should be. No offense, it's not going to be at Mississippi State and Ole Miss. You can wind up there, and that doesn't mean you're bad. But if the cream rises to the top, it just does. And not just in dairy, in sports too. And Georgia should always be great at every sport. And the athletic, in football specifically, when you look at that coaching staff, you say, well, Glenn Schumann, like nobody thinks about Glenn Schumann 7 years ago. Like, he's not a guy. Dan Lanning definitely had. Dan Lanning may be the best example of this. When Dan left William Jewell, which is like, a division, it's Coker. It's where I went. You know what I mean? It's the same kind of thing. Then he went to a high school. Then he was a GA at Pitt. And then he goes to Arizona State as a GA, where he learned a lot, he would tell you. And then Sam Houston State, and then to Alabama, which is where he met Kirby. And that was in the final season that they were there. If I'm not mistaken, that's where he met Kirby. Then he goes to Memphis for a couple of years. And then, boom, all of a sudden he's at Georgia. And that was in 2018. How many guys are at Memphis that are eventually going to be at Georgia? Right? Not a lot of guys. And this guy, Dan Lanning, is viewed as one of, if not the up-and-coming coach in college football. There's not a lot of, up-and-coming left, I guess you could say. It doesn't look like, Lincoln Riley's already gotten to where he's going to go. Kirby's not young anymore. Are we young? Someone said I was young the other day, and I was like, I don't know about that part. But, Dan Lanning got a big break because he went to Alabama and met Kirby there. And Kirby is one example. Dan would have made it probably no matter what after he got to Alabama. But my point is, though, that he didn't go back to Alabama. He went to Georgia, and then from there he went to Georgia. He went to Memphis, and once he left to go to Georgia, he didn't leave for another position until it was the head coach job. And when I remember what that was like when he was hired from Memphis, and people were like, what now? Who is this guy? You got that a lot. He learned a lot from Todd Graham out at Arizona State. And the time that guys are learning. I was talking about Todd, delivering pizzas or burritos or whatever he did. The time where you learn, I think the time you learn the most about your profession, I would imagine, or it's been my experience, is in your 20s. Okay, you're not getting paid anything, and that's fine. Because you don't have a house typically, so you learn everything, and then if you're willing to continue to do it, you'll get to places like Georgia. But when you look around at this coaching staff at Georgia right now, you know, it's not exactly a bunch of chumps, right? I mean, how many of these guys are going to eventually uh, be head coaches? I mean, I don't know. I mean, Mike was a head coach. Will Muschamp was a head coach. You've got let me just go. I don't want to skip anybody here. Oops, coaches. You know, when you talk about Mike, people love to hate Mike Bobo, and that's fine, whatever. I'm not quite on that. I look at reality and say, oh, he hasn't won a national championship. Well, I mean, neither had. Oh God, now I've forgotten the guy that Mike replaced. He hadn't won it either. You know, so it's just what it is. I mean, Josh Crawford. A lot of people talk about what he brings. You got T. Robinson. T. Rob. Will he be a head coach one day? Schumann, I would imagine, will be. Trey Scott, I don't know. Stacy, doesn't seem like Stacy will be, but you get my point. I mean, like, of this group, Williams, Uzo, Deribe, and there's a lot of guys on here that eventually will move on to other stuff. It was only a matter of time before Dell McGee was going to get to where he was going to go. It was just, to me, too obvious. He had already been a head coach in high school. But I think there are implied pressures that should be there. And here's the other quote from Todd. If you're not having juice or you're not having fun doing it, how can it be that way? Talking about being the best coach at your position in the country. Think about it this way, though. In all honesty, a lot of these guys are making $30,000 a month coaching football, and that's not to diminish what they do. It's not. We're not putting rockets in the sky, and no one's curing cancer, but it is a difficult job, and they've chosen that profession, and they are extremely well paid. But you'd rather be at a place that is an incubator for future success than be at a place that's a bit of a dead end. Again, I talked about Mississippi State earlier. I mean, you can learn anywhere. You can. But Georgia is a place that should be great, and it should be a place where you can watch it at the highest level. That is the highest level. I mean, is there a football program that's better than Georgia's? Not right now. Doesn't mean they're going to win the national championship, but there's not one that's better. That doesn't mean it's the only place you can learn. I mean, you can learn at Clemson, you can learn at Carolina, or South Carolina. But with the resources that you've got at Georgia, you should be excited to go out and coach. You should be excited to recruit. That doesn't mean it's easy. It's not easy. It's a tough job, man. But it is something that y'all don't see it because you don't go to practice and you're not on the sidelines at games. Todd Hartley's actually in the booth, so maybe something he runs by some of y'all. But Hartley particularly, and he's not the only one, but the intensity of the coaching staff, I would say the guys that I noticed the most in terms of the way, not screaming and yelling, but Uzo Deribe is one, Hartley is one, T. Rob's new, Dante Williams new, Josh Crawford, they're all new. But you see the way with the outside linebackers before a game, like I often watch them on the road. I don't know why I've gotten into that habit, but the focus, you don't have to scream and yell to be intense. Okay? That's a misnomer. Screaming and yelling is vastly overrated. You have to coach. And intensity is not always raising your voice. So, and throwing chairs and being Bob Knight. I mean, come on. That's 1970s stuff. That don't work today. And it didn't work a lot back then, if we're being honest. So you got to be who you are, but you got to capture the attention of your group and your room. And you have to coach. And intensity is not always screaming and yelling, but there are times when you do have to do that to get your guys going. I mean, you watch Hartley, you watch the defensive, you watch the pass rushers, the outside linebackers. You can see it there, man. I've gotten all this way without telling y'all to sign up for the newsletter. Make sure you're signing up for the newsletter. It's very important to us, and you're going to miss out on a lot of stories. We sent something out today about KJ Bolden. So make sure you're signing up for the newsletters. But I think that quote from Todd should be well received. He understands, as a guy that didn't play college football, I think he understands what the opportunity is that he's got. Will he be a head coach one day? I don't think he's thinking about that necessarily when they're going out there. Man, he was on them that first day. But maybe that was the day to be on him. Like, but you got to coach the right way all the time. It's challenging, but they've got a great opportunity at Georgia. That's for sure. Thanks for watching.